Hello and welcome to the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the 3 M's: mindsets, myth busting, and mentoring, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. I want to start out this episode today by letting everybody know that I have 2 very sleepy, snoring Rottweilers at my feet, and I'm too much of a pushover to move them. So if you hear some random snoring in the background on occasion, that is Axel and Apollo, and I hope they don't interrupt us too much. But all I can say is that they are good company to have, and maybe it'll make for a little bit of some entertainment. But other than that, today's episode is a really exciting one. We are going to be digging into digestion. It is something that we deal with at Case Specific Nutrition across our 6 locations every day with clientele. And I think more people have digestive issues as a secondary diagnosis or a mention than probably anything else. People come in for a lot of reasons. We work with about 1,000 to 1,200 people a month, and for all across the board, whether it be people looking to improve their health and wellness, change their get out of metabolic syndrome, or you work on preventive care or remove risks for chronic disease, or change their body composition or fuel themselves. We work with obviously the eating disorder and disordered eating populations across the board. And it's more common than anything that people come in with their primary or chief complaint, and throughout the consult it comes up that digestion is an issue. They're having some irritable bowel, or they're having some inconsistency, or they're having some bloating or some gas, or just some upset, distended stomach. And once again, dietitians, we are the masters of the gut, and so we are ready and we are excited to work with people on this. And I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of times we get people that come in and they're focused on meeting with us for their specific goal, and they don't really think about the fact that we are really the people that would be best equipped to help them with their digestion. And there's plenty of people that we work with a gastroenterologist for, and there's issues that a gastro needs to work on. But in many, many cases, the interventions that help manage digestive symptoms are related to diet and to lifestyle. And so what I wanted to do today is I wanted to introduce you to a little bit of Digestive 101, which are some things that you can think about if you're suffering or struggling with digestive issues that might solve the problem before it even starts. And so what I always encourage, and what we start with at Case Specific Nutrition, is we always start with the basics and work our way up, because there's a lot of reasons why digestion can get thrown off, all the way from simple dietary interventions to stress and emotional issues that are going on that are changing the way the gut's working, to the actual inflammation and the sort of habitat that is the gut with the microbiome. And we work along the entire spectrum. But we always start with the slow pitch softball that I call the 3 F's. And the 3 F's are just like the 3 M's. So apparently I like 3 letters. That's, I guess, my thing. But the 3 F's are fat, fluid, and fiber. And so when we think of a normal bowel movement, something that we need to consider is that our intestine is a very, very long, windy tract. And for food to work its way down, there's a lot of things that take place. We need to be looking at how it breaks down, and where it breaks down, and what happens along the way. But the ultimate goal, when we're looking at is it related to actual food, we want to take a look at the fat, the fluid, and the fiber as the base contents. And if that's because the fat is a natural stool softener. And so if we're having looser stools, or we're having hard or more impacted stools, which they call like rabbit stools a lot of the time, that is often noting that the fat content of the diet is not high enough or is too high. So we want to make sure that there's an appropriate amount of fat and appropriate types of fat. For many of you, you can think of when you've had ribs and fried chicken and a lot of those heavy fatty meals, you end up having looser, softer stools the next day. And that is because of the fat content. So fiber content is the next one that we look at. And fiber is interesting because there's 2 main types that we look at. We look at the soluble and the insoluble. And the soluble fiber is the fiber that breaks down. So water can break it down. and it forms a gel. So soluble fiber comes from our fruits and our grains, things like our oats, and those things pull water into our intestine, and that water then makes a gel out of the fiber, and that gel is what softens the stool and allows it to go forward. And more importantly, though, the soluble fiber is what pairs with the insoluble fiber, which is what doesn't break down. I like to call this vegetable carcass. It's the skeleton. If you think about the celery, it's those strings on the celery that our body can't break down. And if we have too much of the insoluble, and not, which is that vegetable carcass, and not enough of the soluble, we have this dry, dehydrated stool that can oftentimes stop us. And so we can combine it with the soluble fiber, and it makes a mix of a gel, and it has the roughage, and then that actually moves through the gut a lot more, consistently. For those of you that have ever taken a Metamucil or a Benefiber or a Barn Dad's, all of those are soluble fiber. So all they're doing is trying to pull water into the intestine. And in many cases, doing something like eating an apple would have the same amount of soluble fiber, or having a half cup of oatmeal, or a really hearty piece of quality baked bread like a Dave's Killer Bread or a fresh local bakery whole wheat or whole grain bread would give you the same soluble fiber that a serving of Metamucil would, and allow that water to get pulled in and create that softer stool that then moves its way down. And once again, we can hear where fluid then becomes the next piece, because you can take all the Metamucil you want, but if you are dehydrated, it's not going to work too well. And for any of you out there that take Miralax is called an osmotic. And so all it does is it pulls water, it forces water into the intestine. But once again, if you are very, very dehydrated, your body and your kidneys are going to really restrict the amount of water that's allowed into the gut. And so once again, you're going to be left with a gut that is dry, and that gut is then not going to move stools along. And so the fat, fluid, and fiber are really the ways we ensure that there's adequate fluid and adequate contents that then are allowed to create a bowel movement that can work its way through the intestine. It's almost like if you think about a sliding board or a river, the river requires water and a boat. And so the fiber becomes the boat, and then the fluid and the fat is what allows us to have the river that then works its way down. And this is maybe not a great or fun thing to listen to, but it becomes an extremely important thing for a lot of people to pay attention to. If we've looked at the fat, looked at the fiber, and looked at the fluid, and we're saying, hey, the person's well hydrated, and there's good fiber content of both types, and then there's good fat content, the next thing we need to look at is the spread of the food itself, grazing versus meals. I'm a big fan of saying I like people to eat food in piles, and the piles should have multiple items in them. And the reason for that is because when you eat food in piles, what you end up with is a complete bowel movement. And so something to remember is that when we eat, food goes into our stomach, and then it stops there, gets broken down, then goes to the small intestine, gets kind of absorbed and starts to get broken down further, goes into the large intestine, and the bacteria start to eat it, and then it goes into the colon and then gets excreted. And so food kind of works its way through 3 or 4 sets of the body, almost like an elevator going from floor to floor. And if you're just grazing on random things all day, you're never going to have a complete stool. There's never going to be a bowel movement that is going to be from a meal that stopped in the stomach and had carbohydrates and fats and proteins and vegetables, and then went to the intestine and worked its way down. If we're snacking on one thing, it's going to go into the stomach, then to the next phase. And if you eat an hour later, something's going to follow behind it. And so if you're somebody that notices that you don't ever have like one complete bowel movement, you seem like you have small bowel movements spread across the day, that could be how you're spreading your food out. And the only reason that this is relevant or useful is if you have discomfort from it. The goal of eating food in piles is to kind of regulate and make your digestive tract a little more predictable by giving it a little bit more of predictable food. And what that does is it slows down the digestion in the stomach, which makes for a more complete digestive process, releases all of the enzymes that are needed, releases acids, and then goes into the intestine where those enzymes do their job. You break down your food. Because the meal's complete, it's slower, which means it then gets absorbed better, which you get more of the nutrients from. And then it goes down to the large intestine. The bacteria do their thing. They aren't getting a bunch of random things. Instead, they're getting the remnants and the contents that they're supposed to get, which means your bacteria then get fed appropriately, and they get fueled appropriately, which means they don't create an excessive amount of gas or an abundance, which means you don't get distended and uncomfortable, and the bacteria don't travel farther up the intestine, which is what happens if you've ever heard of people struggling with leaky gut or SIBO, and then you have a normal bowel movement. And so putting food in the piles, balancing it out and making sure that your meals have fats and fibers, and then good protein and good contents is going to make the digestive tract more predictable. So from there, if we've looked at the fat, the fluid, and the fiber, we've made our 3 F's and we've made sure they're good. We're looking at our food and it's swept up into good piles. That should be creating a really good digestive process. And we are still dealing with some issues. That's where we want to start to then try and identify where the issues are. Because as dietitians, we can make lots of changes based on where in the gut it's happening. If we're having upper abdomen issues, particularly if it's centralized, we know that it's going to be the stomach. And if it's the stomach, that typically means that the stomach's either being overwhelmed by protein or by fats. And in that case, that can lead to getting thrown off with acid. It can lead to problems like stomach ulcers and reflux and all of those things. If that's the case, we can look at how to help the stomach, and there's certain supplements and certain considerations that we would use in that case. A lot of people will actually, if they're having underproducing of acid, they can actually utilize apple cider vinegar, whether it be in a dressing or as a part of a drink, never by itself. And that can actually serve as a little bit of an acid that helps break down the food. For those that are overproducing stomach acid, we can look at things like licorice and aloe vera and bismuth and a couple other supplements. And one of the ones that we use all the time at Case Specific is Thorne Labs has a product called Peptiguard, which is a really, really good natural product that allows reduction of stomach acids. And that reduction of stomach acids can help set it up so the reflux goes away, the digestive tract calms down, but it prevents getting on a medication that might be a little bit too potent and might cause the other problem. If we see the intestine, the issues being more of a lower abdomen issue, where it's like bloating and distension, a lot of times that can be related to more of like a bacterial issue, where either the food that we're eating is not getting absorbed properly by us, and so the bacteria are getting it, and then they're overproducing gas, which in case we would look at digestive enzymes and look to try, and we'd also consider the FODMAP diet at that point and see if we needed to investigate certain carbohydrates and then supplement appropriate bacteria into the form of probiotics and the proper enzymes in the form of digestive enzymes to try and optimize. And then from there, if we notice that we are having just like an overarching distension, that's where once again we would actually be looking at the probiotic and the digestive enzymes to make sure the gut bacteria is in a good place and the enzymes are doing what they're supposed to be doing. If all of that's been covered and considered, we then need to start considering the effect of stress. And stress is a very, very common problem for a lot of people. And something to remember is that our stress response physically is not the same as our stress response mentally. Many of us we call ourselves busy. Oh, I'm not stressed. I'm just busy. I just have a lot going on. Well, whether or not you're mentally at the state of a breakdown or just mentally in the state of busy or in the state of do, your internal system is doing the same thing. It's utilizing adrenaline. It's utilizing your sympathetic nervous system, and it's spiking cortisol, which is your stress hormone, so that you can operate at a higher function and in a more focused way. And cortisol inhibits digestive processes. It prevents the body from producing enough acids, secreting enough enzymes, and it also makes the muscles in the intestinal tract move erratically and sometimes not move at all, which is why a lot of people that have constant stress and inadequate sleep and poor habits find themselves constipated, and then all of a sudden they have urgent bowel movements. And it's because their body's doing erratic things, right? It's getting constipated, which means it's not moving, and then it all of a sudden gets irritated, and then it floods a bunch of water into the intestine and tries to flush out that irritation. And so you go back and forth from diarrhea to constipation, or from constipation to dumping syndrome. And if that's the case, and we've already looked at the diet, and the diet's pretty standardized and it's pretty consistent, and we've already looked at the gut health and the enzymes and everything are good, we want to look at how to affect stress. And there's a lot of lifestyle interventions there, including trying to slow down around our meals instead of, reading emails while we chew our food mindlessly, actually sitting and calming down and getting to a point where we actually get a nice calm exhale, and then eating, having 10 minutes after you eat a meal where you actually relax and let yourself digest before going to the next task, doing things like mindful meditation, and inserting things like sipping tea and other slow relating options, which I did in my podcast on stop as a way to think about it, is to help kind of relax and allow the body to produce the appropriate neurotransmitters to regulate so we stop overstimulating our gut. For many people, things like 5-HTP, which is a supplement that actually is tryptophan. It's amino acid from our diet that becomes hydroxylated, but 5-hydroxytryptophan is what 5-HTP stands for in our stomach. And so if we take the supplement, it goes through our stomach, goes into our intestine, gets absorbed, goes into our brain, and then it becomes serotonin. And so for those of you that are taking an SSRI for anxiety or depression, you cannot use 5-HTP because it does competing things with your medication. But for those of you that might have some stress and do not medicate, 5-HTP can be a way to give yourself some extra serotonin. And serotonin is what communicates the brain and the gut. If you've ever heard of the gut-brain highway, serotonin and your gut bacteria are what communicate and signal back and forth, and that's what regulates our digestive process. So in an attempt to calm our gut down, we can supplement our serotonin in the form of 5-HTP. Most people take between 100 and 200 milligrams in the evening time, about 1 hour before bed, and it actually helps improve sleep quality, improves wakefulness and energy levels during the day for a lot of people. But most importantly, that increased level of serotonin can actually slow down and kind of calm the gut. We oftentimes will pair that with a magnesium supplement in the evening, which once again helps with the muscles in the gut and can help kind of regulate those. And it also improves sleep quality. And so those two things can kind of help reduce stress and help improve our overall mind and body connection. And paired with actual intentional stress reduction can have a really profound effect. Many people are starting to experiment with CBD oil as well, and that's something that's still being researched, so it's not at the point where we could call it clinically valid, but there's definitely some good evidence that shows that cannabinoids or CBD can have kind of a calming effect on the body as a whole and can reduce inflammation, which means it can have an effect on kind of relaxing the muscles in the gut. So for those suffering from constipation, it can actually be a really nice way to reduce that issue. And so that is kind of a rundown from start to finish of some of the things we analyze as dietitians. And it's part of the reason why I always encourage people, if they're having gut issues, before they see a gastroenterologist or in tandem with a gastroenterologist, make sure you meet with a dietitian, because we really are well versed in the gut, and we can look at the food and make sure the spread is right and the contents are right to optimize. We can look at the lifestyle and make sure that the habits surrounding meals are set up properly for appropriate digestion. We can make sure, based on your symptoms, that our gut bacteria are in a good place using fermented foods and probiotics and different strains of probiotics. We can make sure our enzymes are in a good place using the FODMAP diet as an elimination protocol, and then using appropriate enzymes to allow for breakdown of things that might be irritating. And then from there, we can look through the lifestyle and the stress and actually look at ways to calm down the gut and kind of detach it from your day-to-day stress levels using things like CBD and magnesium and 5-HTP, as well as things like rhodiola and ashwagandha and other herbs. And beyond all that, we can work on stress-related, actual stress itself using lifestyle protocols and positive interventions and intentional interruptions in the day, which, if you've been a listener of this podcast, I've done countless episodes on trying to interrupt the brain and regulate our body and get ourselves in a good place mentally and physically. So please, I encourage you, even if it's not with case-specific nutrition, if you're having gut issues, don't hesitate to reach out to a dietitian. And if you don't have one you know of, reach out to us here at Case-Specific Nutrition. We have 14 dietitians in our group across our 6 offices, and we have digestive specialists, but all of us work on digestion in some fashion. We do virtual consults as well as in-person consults. We're still eligible to do a lot of virtual through insurance. And so we have a lot of really good opportunities. For those of you that do want to reach out to us here at Case Specific, you can contact us through our website or contact our admin through our admin email, admin@casespecificnutrition.com. And our phone number is also on our website. We're more than happy to chat with you. As I said before, we do check insurance, and a lot of insurances are still allowing for virtual as well as in-person visits. And we have dietitians ready to help if this is something that you are looking to work on or improve or need help with. You can contact us through casespecificnutrition.com or reach out to us on social media, on all media at Case Specific Nutrition. Thanks again for listening to this podcast. I encourage you to share this one if you found it valuable, and make sure you share it with someone you know and love that is having digestive issues or might benefit from this podcast. We will be back next week with our next Mindset Monday podcast. But in the meantime, be well, and as always, spread the health.